ahead and get started now. We have a quorum. Call the meeting to order. Robert Thompson notified me that earlier that he had a work commitment. Several days ago, I wouldn't be here. And Sean Rojas is ill today. And he provided notice that he was ill and thought he shouldn't attend the meeting. So that's understandable. So I've not heard from Sharon. I've not heard from the others. So let's go on. The first item on the agenda is approval of the minutes of our meeting for September 24. The minutes have been circulated. Have the members had an opportunity to review the minutes? Is there any additions or corrections?
No.
Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Pastor Sims moved, Odell Harris seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
They've been approved. The next item is the public agenda. When I last checked, there was no one here for the public agenda, so I think we'll move right past that. Staff report, Captain Nicholson.
Good afternoon. From September 14th through October 12th, we had a total of 31 complaints in the police department. 27 were external, 4 were internal. We closed 11 cases from the previous months. The type of cases over the last month during this time period, September 14th through October 12th, we had 1 excessive force complaint, 13 improper conduct, 13 procedural violations, 1 safety violation, and 3 unnecessary force. And then just to give a snapshot of year-to-date totals, we've had 306 total complaints. 188 have been external, and 118 have been internal.
Are there any questions?
The total complaints for this reporting period are about equal to previous, but the percentage on internal complaints is quite low in comparison. Everybody's been on good behavior, or training upticks, or what?
Well, a lot of times our internal complaints are, those are just things that maybe the lieutenant or sergeant sees out on a call. And so those are the things, like if some improper conduct is brought to the light by one of the supervisors, then they initiate an internal investigation on those sorts of things. But when you see the external complaints like the rude conduct, those are excessive force, obviously those would be like complaints where either the supervisor initiated them or a citizen went up to PSB or called the station to make a complaint, so making them external.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Next item on the agenda is our presentation on DTI, defensive tactics, traffic stops.
Thank you. I'll start by introducing myself real quick, then I'll have Officer Jabbar introduce herself. I'm Officer Eric Petrowski. I work at the Law Enforcement Training Center. I'm currently a full-time defensive tactics instructor up there. I've been at the training center for about 3 years, and I've been on the Wichita Police Department. It'll be 29 years in January. RJ.
I'm Officer Rebecca Jabara, and I've been a police officer here for 12 years. And I've been a defensive tactics instructor for 10 years. And he likes to talk more than I do, so that's why he's going to start this for us. Go ahead.
Okay, so what we're going to talk about a little bit is, first we'll start off with what we do at the training center as far as training recruits. This is a list of just things that the defensive tactics instructors train our recruits on. And it kind of goes in stages or waves. We try to train, each discipline at a time, build on each discipline of itself. So pressure point control tactics, if you're very familiar with those, it's pressure points around the body. A lot of them are touch pressure. They cause pain. We get compliance that way. We do a lot of interpersonal communication in scenarios, which is basically how to talk to people. Mental health training in scenarios as well. With that, everything we do, we like to do scenarios along with it. We do DV scenarios, which are domestic violence oriented. They go through extensive handcuffing searches, close quarter combat, ground fighting. Also, they do clinch work, which is on the, hard to explain, but it's before they get to the ground. Taser baton and OC spray, weapon retention, because it's important to be able to hang on to the tools that you have, knife defense, firearms, and we do extensive scenario-based training with the recruits, utilizing all of the tactics that they have built upon. And then they do traffic stops, which include standard traffic stops and high risk. All of this totals approximately 285 hours just with what we teach. That doesn't include remedial, and it also does not include times that they seek outside of their classes. So a lot of times they'll come to us and say, hey, can you come in early, tomorrow morning or stay late? And we're more than happy to do that to help them polish their skills a little bit. So that's a little bit as far as what they get training-wise in the academy. And if you guys have questions along the way, please feel free to put your hand up and ask, and we'll answer them as best we can. So we're going to talk a little bit about use of force. Studies, and this varies a little bit, show around the nation that between 88 and 98% of the time, all the arrests we make, we don't use any force. We show up in our uniform, we use good verbal control, verbal commands, command presence, and we get compliance. And the reason why this statistic varies, it's a lot of because of this experience of the officer. I know that for me, as a younger officer, I wasn't able to talk to people as well. And as I got more experience, I was able to talk to people a little bit better and reason with them and rationalize with them and get them to, comply with me ultimately. So we do spend a lot of time in the academy training officers how to use verbal skills as well as physical skills, because we think that's extremely important. Next slide. The decision to use force is dictated by the actions of the suspect. If the suspect is compliant, no force has been used. That's our goal. If he's resistive, then that sets us down a path where potentially we're going to have to use force at some point in time. Our goal really is for us and the citizens to be safe. If we do have to use force, we're going to use the least amount of force that we have to accomplish the goal in that circumstance. What we have next is what's called our force continuum. It takes a while to explain it to the recruits, so I'll kind of paraphrase a little bit for you guys. How it works, if you look on the left-hand side, has levels of resistance, which is what the suspect is going to give. It starts with psychological intimidation, mean mugging, things like that. Verbal noncompliance, an example would be like, no, I'm not going to jail. Passive resistance, somebody who's more dead weight or just passively resisting. Defensive resistance, where they're pushing away or possibly running away. Active aggression, where they're actively trying to fight us. And then at the top of it, it's aggravated active aggression, which would potentially be with a weapon, something that is capable of causing death or great bodily harm to us. Obviously, someone with a knife, firearm, club, thing like that would fall into that category. Levels of control, we start out obviously with officer presence. We show up in a clean pressed uniform looking sharp. That helps us out a little bit. Verbal direction, we ask them what we would like them to do. If that doesn't work, we work with soft, empty hand techniques to get what we need to do. Then we follow that up with hard, empty hand techniques. Our intermediate weapons are next. That includes baton, taser, and OC spray. And then at the top of that would be lethal force. Any questions on that so far? We'll talk about that a little bit more as we talk about some of these other things. And if we need to go back to that, we can go back and look at it. So within this force continuum, we can increase our level of force based on a disparity. So if there's an officer that's on the smaller end and you've got a suspect that's much larger and much more powerful, we don't have to start with a low level of force. We can up our level of force based on just that. Also based on these other things on here. If we know the person is a martial artist or they have an extensive background in taekwondo, jiu-jitsu, some type of martial art, we can up our force level based on that as long as we think we can get the job done. Next, we'll talk about the 1+1 theory. That allows the officer to escalate one level of force above the resistance being encountered. So an example would be an officer faced with an assailant armed with a club would be justified in choosing a sidearm to defend themselves because that club is capable of causing death or great bodily harm. Obviously, we're going to try to gain distance and stay out of the range of that club when we can. But another example would be so if someone pulls a club out, we don't have to pull our baton out, which would be an equal level of force. Also, if someone pulls a knife, we don't have to pull a knife out of our gear and do a knife fight with them. We have the ability to up that level of force on that. Another example would be if you're in a fight with someone, they pull a knife and we're trying to defend you, you probably wouldn't want us pulling a knife to try to take care of that threat. You'd want us to up it to another level of force. So necessary force is the only lawful force. It must be necessary at the time it is used. Then once the situation has been resolved, we are no longer justified in using any force. And I'll tell you right now that our department investigates excessive force, and we've had officers sustained for excessive force, and it is absolutely not tolerated by this agency on this department at all. And it is actually punishable up to being terminated. So it's important to also understand as we talk about the force continuum, and I can go back to it if you guys need to explain it. We don't need to climb the ladder starting at the lowest level. Okay, if soft empty hands doesn't work, we don't have to try this and then try this and try this. We can jump in where we think the force is going to be reasonable and where it's going to be effective, which is good for us because we shouldn't have to try X, Y, and Z before this happens. If someone's pointing a gun at us, we shouldn't have to try to go hands-on and then use pepper spray and then, do these other things. So that gives us a little bit level of, to help us out a little bit. Next, we're going to talk about our Supreme Court case, which is Graham versus Connor. If you're not familiar with this is the Supreme Court case which governs all use of force. Nearly every agency uses this, and what it basically says is that the force has to be objectively reasonable at the time by a reasonable officer. And you can't go back with the hindsight of 2020 and look at the case and say, well, I'm armchair quartering this, I would have done this. Because you have to understand, when this force is being used, it's very high stress. The officer's probably in fear of bodily harm to himself or someone else, and they're making split-second decisions in the time. So the force has to be reasonable. It doesn't always have to be the best. We try to train our officers to make the best decisions, but it has to be what's reasonable at the time. That's how we look at it when we're judging use of force. And us as defensive tactics instructors, we do review a lot of use of force cases for our agency, and I'll be honest with you, our officers are really doing a very good job with their use of force. So it contains 3 factors of this. This is still on the Graham. Severity of the crime, what do they do? Was it a low-level misdemeanor or high-level felony? Whether they're an immediate threat to us or someone else at the time, and whether they're actively resisting arrest or attempting to evade by flight, which is running away or driving away in a car. Example I'll give you is we have someone that we arrest for a very low-level misdemeanor, shoplift, or even lower than that, say it's a seatbelt ticket. The person's running on hard concrete at a full speed. I would normally be justified in using a taser to apprehend them because he's running away, he's actively resisting. If I use a taser on him, there's a reasonable chance I know that if I tase him, he's going to lock up, because that's what the taser is designed to do, and fall to the ground stiff as a board and cause some injuries to him. So I probably would not be justified using a taser because the severity of the crime didn't meet that level, so my force would probably not be justified in that incident. Now, if it's a high-level felony type of a thing, it's an ag battery type thing, then yes, that's probably more justified. Any questions on that as we try to explain this? So force is never to be used as retribution or as a punishment. The only time we're going to use force is in the defense of us or someone else, or to prevent an arrest from being defeated, or them escaping us as well too. So that's highlighted because that's really very important. Again, officers don't need to wait to use force if they're being assaulted. They're trained to look for pre-attack indicators, and we'll cover some of those pre-attack indicators, what they are, and our officers are trained to look for these very subtly. You may have seen them if you watch some videos of street fights or whatever, but if someone takes a fighting stance and balls their fists up, obviously we're going to try to gain distance, but we don't necessarily have to wait for them to throw a punch. Just as someone points a gun at us, we don't have to wait for them to actually start shooting at us to defend ourselves or another person, because that's often what we do. So we take the overt movement as a threat and justify the force depending on the situation. So some of the indicators, muscle tension, target glance. They may be target glancing at either your weapon or an area of your body that they're intending to strike. Stance shift, they may shift into that boxer stance or that bladed type stance. They may ball their fists up. Increased agitation. They may tell you verbally, I'm going to, kick your whatever, or blank, blank, blank. 1,000-yard stare, which they're looking through you. They may just all of a sudden stop talking, which tells me that they're probably formulating some kind of a plan in their brain, because it's hard for the brain to think and talk sometimes at one time. Another thing we also see is we see a lot of posturing. People getting big, you see this a lot before people fight. They start removing clothing. They also start to avoid eye contact as well too. So those are just some of the numerous indicators that we are trained to look for on people. Next thing we'll highlight here is this new product that we have gotten out recently. It's called the Wrap. I don't know if any of you have heard of it, but there are some videos online we have of us applying this in training. It's been deployed in the field, a dozen or so, at least times.
Yeah.
I know Patrol South likes using it, right, Captain? They're big fans of it, and we're big fans of it too. It's a restraint device that basically has 3 pieces. There's an ankle device, which is the yellow device up there, leg restraint, and a chest harness. When coupled together, they actually secure the person very well without hurting them and restrict their mobility. What it does for us is keeps us from kicking, keeps the suspect from kicking, injuring us like that. The only thing they can really do is headbutt or spit on us, which we have the ability to apply a spit shield if that's something that they are potentially doing. We also have received a helmet, I think Patrol South has it, that we could put a padded helmet on them to keep not only ourselves protected, but them protected from bodily harm in case they're against a wall or something. Also, the good thing about this is if it's applied properly, there's no chance of them getting into that prone face down position where we see issues with positional asphyxiation. People that are on their stomach for a long time, it's hard for them to breathe, especially if they're overweight or have pre-existing medical conditions. So this is designed to eliminate that. So hopefully we can get them in this, get them seated up, and get them breathing and get them restrained a little bit better.
We're using this for people that have already been fighting us and they're continuing to fight. If we're trying to transport them or something, we don't want them to, a lot of times they'll bang their head against the wall and they'll injure themselves. So it's safer for us, but honestly it helps them out the most because they're wrapped up like, we call it a burrito, because their legs are so tight. It doesn't hurt them at all. So when we do the training, the officers are kind of nervous because we make them get in it. But we do that so they know that this doesn't hurt them. It just restricts their movement. But if you can see the straps come forward so they're able to breathe really easily still. And it's awful hard to get somebody from one place to another when they're kicking and fighting and trying to hurt us. We have to use more force on them. So if we can stop them from doing that, the less force that we have to use on them. So that's why we really like this.
I
I've
think
seen that
with-
demonstrated
Yeah.
once. It appears to me, though, that is a multi-officer effort.
Absolutely.
It is.
How many officers do you need to?
We need less when they're in this thing than if they're fighting and we're trying to move them from one to
Right,
another.
but getting them into the thing.
Yeah, minimum of 3 is what we tell people.
Depends on the level of resistance. If someone is really fighting or they're really strong, we're going to need more,
Yeah.
obviously. And so normally with this, if somebody hears, hey, start me the Wrap out there, you're going to have additional officers come in and assist you with this, and we're going to be able to get it on pretty quickly. We train the officers in training to get this on under a minute and a half. And we actually had some Patrol South officers. That was the Broadway Corridor team. Well, Patrol East, I guess, broke the record, didn't they?
I'm
Sorry.
sorry.
At the
No, you
time,
don't
the
have
Broadway Corridor team was under a minute,
Yeah.
working together, communicating, and getting this thing on. So people that do this a lot can really get it on quickly and safely. The day is young. That's the challenge right there, Captain. So some of the things it's designed to obviously reduce injury to the citizens and to officers. If we can reduce work comp claims, have less officers out on injury, that's good for us. We have seen also us put combative people in our patrol vehicles, and they kick doors, kick windows. This is designed to reduce that too. And public perception. Does this look a lot better carrying this gentleman? I realize he's not kicking and screaming, but then someone that is in leg shackles kicking and screaming, us having to drag the person down. So we are always concerned about public perception. If we can keep the public on our side by using this and having, that looks pretty good, that's always a win for us. So that is the Wrap, and that is actually a wrap on the presentation. I kind of just ad-libbed that at the last minute. Do you have any questions so
He
far?
didn't ad-lib that. He does that every time he does something on the Wrap. That's
I
on
kind
him.
of actually do, so
You,
it's a new audience. You guys have any questions about use of force or anything that we teach or anything we do with the recruits?
You referenced that an officer showing up in a uniform is a way to control. And I was reading today, actually, in one of the cities that's had some problems, that they've now implemented a rule that when they serve warrants, they had to have at least 2 uniformed officers present so that the people will know who's serving the warrants. Does the Wichita Police Department do that, or do they have a policy on that?
Captain, you want to answer that for me, or?
Well, we have a uniformed officer that's present, yes. That way, after the slide has gone through, that officer comes following up. I've done it many times in my career, being the uniformed officer that follows up.
Sometimes with certain warrants, knock and announce, they will have a uniform officer do the knock and announce, and then the other guys will be in their gear and things to keep themselves protected. But their gear has markings, police or SWAT, and then badges and patches and things
Well,
like that.
I would think that would be, that's notice too, who the person is.
Yeah, but yes, we've done that for a long time, since Captain did that when he was an officer.
Any other
Just
questions?
a question regarding use of force when the suspect is in handcuffs.
Yes.
You know, you've seen where they're in handcuffs and yet they're still being, or pain compliance is still being applied, or I've even seen where a suspect is tased while in handcuffs and so on and so forth. So what is taught in regards to that?
Well, that's hopefully one of the reasons why we have the wrap. That's designed to, we shouldn't have to worry about that at all. But if they're still resisting in handcuffs, our policy does allow to use certain levels of force depending on the resistance that they're giving us.
Now,
Because wouldn't,
it's obvious, same thing, it's always, whether they're in handcuffs or not, Graham versus Connors applied, that's the Supreme Court decision. So the fact that they're in handcuffs is part of the totality. So are they able to hurt us as much in handcuffs? No. Now, depending on the position, are they reared back and about to kick us in the face? It's potential that that is reasonable, but most of the time, it's gonna be harder to justify typically if they are in handcuffs. But of course, if I'm cuffing this person, you still find people that have a lot of flexibility and mobility, that maybe that search hasn't been done and they might not have been secured and finished doing that search, or if they're on their back and kicking another officer, that might be a time to use that. So I hate to say it depends. That's what I tell the recruits when they ask a question, because they want a black and white. But we can't give that because there's all these different circumstances depend each time. And so sometimes it might be reasonable. But most of the time when they're cuffed, that is part of the totality when we're looking at objectively reasonable. So I hate to tell you, but it depends.
yeah, because when the wrap goes on, aren't they already in handcuffs and then
Yes.
the
Yes.
wrap? So,
So the fight to get them in handcuffs, we can't eliminate that yet.
sure.
But you're correct. So once they're handcuffed, then we apply that leg restraint, and then we work to get them in the rest of the wrap.
And our policy allows that if we have someone we know that's been combative in the past, we're going to get the wrap started before we even try to get the person in cuffs so we can have that available. The goal is to have these in most of the cars and have them available out in the field. There's a limited amount right now, but the goal is to have more of these available, and it's a really good tool we've seen to reduce our uses of force.
But if you were volunteering to get wrapped, I could call one.
Also,
Essentially, it doesn't hurt
it really doesn't, no. I think Lieutenant Lang got wrapped. Yes. So a lot of the supervisors volunteer to do it. I think it's great. And every officer that went through the training got wrapped as well, which is a good thing to be able to testify in court. Well, my client sustained an injury because of this wrap. Well, I was in the wrap and I wasn't experiencing any pain like he's talking about. When applied properly, it doesn't induce any pain on the individual. And we can always make adjustments once we get them in it if they're complaining of like the ankle strap being too tight or something like that.
Is the wrap ever put on in like the opposite way other than shown in the picture where it's like a person is like hog tied?
We
So,
do not,
no.
yeah, we don't.
It would not work that way.
No.
And that would, I don't know if I suppose you could somehow figure out a way to do that, but they wouldn't be able to bend that way. So no, you can't do that. The first time we had it, somebody had their legs opposite and it wouldn't clip together because it's not designed for that way. So they realized they had to fix the legs and move it around. But no, that won't happen. No,
Yeah, it's not designed to
that's
be
not allowed.
hogtied, nor do we ever train with this system that way.
When we teach handcuffing, they're taught that hogtied is not allowed.
Yes, and that's already in the academy.
I wish we could spend more time on this because the use of force continuum itself is a whole day. So there's a lot to it. So we'd love to have you again and maybe show you a little bit more and go into more detail.
What training, one of the items on the agenda was, and this came up a while back as we were looking at a case about what the officers are taught about how they go about approaching vehicles for traffic stops, you know, what the protocols are, what they are told to look out for and how to handle. Is that part of your
Yes.
training and your involvement as well?
Yes. It's hard to put that in a short cap. So they have traffic stops is a whole week. Well, it's 4 days, excuse me. And there's a lot of behaviors that we try to show them, but it also we've already talked about like the verbal indicators and I'm not going to go to jail, and also we talk about target glancing. That always applies to any time you're talking to a citizen. So that's implied here too, but we talk about furtive movement, reaching around different things, that's a concern, and we teach different passenger side approaches. We teach that as soon as they contact the person, we call it the universal greeting. I'm Officer Jabara. The reason why I pulled you over today is because you ran that stop sign back there. Can you please get your driver's license? So they have it helps to, especially when you're nervous and you're new, to have, okay, I know I need to at least say this part. And so they get to do a whole lot of scenarios with the traffic stops that we have. And that's the good thing they have a lot of scenarios. We didn't used to. We have kept putting more scenarios in because they practice their verbal skills, de-escalation. We have a mental health just for mental health scenarios, and then we sprinkle all that, their different practicing their verbal skills into the defensive tactics, because that's as much a part of defensive tactics is their verbal skills. So it gets you out of a lot of fights, and we prefer compliance instead of fighting. So that's why that's kind of been adopted by defensive tactics. So.
Just to follow up on Jane's question, because we did review a case in here where the citizen was pulled over for failure to signal, and it was into his own drive, and then things escalated, and an arrest was made, and force was used to make an arrest for something that was originally not even an arrestable offense, only required a citation. But because of all the escalation and everything that took place. So how much judgment, or I would say, because you mentioned like the 1,000-yard stare and somebody going silent. But for me as a citizen, if I've chosen to exercise my right to remain silent, then I might just look at you.
So that's...
And not, or stare at you. But, and to me, that's just because I've chosen to be quiet, but your interpretation of that is that it's like a pre-combative kind of deal.
It's potentially, I mean, that's the thing. It's not always, and sometimes a lot of times those are combined, but you certainly do have the right to remain silent, or anybody does, as the Constitution states, but you still have to identify yourself on a traffic stop to our satisfaction, as required by state law.
And you're still in the course of your investigation for whether it's a traffic stop or, you have to still complete some of those things. And so if you refuse to do that, that raises that level. And as far as, just because you're quiet, so this is just like anything else that we do, you're taking in the totality of everything. So just the fact that you're quiet, that's to me not an indicator of a verbal assault. But if you're quiet, you start to look at my belt and where my gun is, and now you're blading, like all those things, that is now a concern for me. But just me standing there being quiet, so we always take into I've already said it, totality of the circumstances, right? And that's what the court expects us to do, and so that's why we're following that.
Totality of circumstances.
Other questions? Anybody else? Thank you, appreciate it.
You
I was going to offer real quick. I know a couple of you have been through the Citizens Police Academy, How many of you been through the Citizens Police Academy?
Hopefully all of us.
All of you then? Okay, then that's fantastic. That's one of the questions that we had was how many of you have gone through it and if you needed a refresher of use of force, a shortened version. But if you are interested in doing a use of force only presentation to where maybe you show up for a couple of evenings or for 4 nights, 2 hours a night or 3 hours a evening, our people are more than willing to actually go through and show you some of the scenarios that are taught to the recruits. That way you have a better grasp of what you're actually, dealing with. All right?
And if you guys want to go through some of the scenarios as well, we're more than happy to do that, and see, decision making and things like that. So absolutely.
Oh, one final question. I think you mentioned that you wish you had more time to train the recruits.
I wish I had more time with you guys. Yes.
Oh,
You
you got with
guys.
us, okay.
Yeah.
Well,
We-
in
we-
in reference to the question of time of training, you mentioned 285 hours,
Just for defensive tactics.
just for the defensive.
Our academy's 24 weeks.
Yeah, 6 months.
The state academy at KLATC is 14 weeks, so we go above and beyond what they teach, what is required. We are almost double what is required by the state of Kansas and Seapost to teach our recruits.
Yeah, we're at 910 hours and they're at 540 hours.
So I think they get the best training available in the state of Kansas, if not the United States.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is the executive session. We've identified 3 potential cases. The last one is tentative. Because of time requirements, I'm going to find that we're going to drop item number C, which is case number 19 PSB 3327, and hold that for another meeting. So at this point, I move that the Citizens Review Board recess into executive session for an hour and 10 minutes, planning to go to 6 p.m. To receive information on case numbers 19 PSB 0582 and 20 PSB 1214 involving personnel matters of non-elected personnel and to protect the privacy interests of identifiable individuals. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, we'll go to executive session. Thank you. back into public session, the, oops. We're back into public session now. The board has considered PSB 19-0582 and made a determination that no recommendations are required. We've had discussions on 20 PSB 1214. As a result of those discussions, the department and the complainant are going to visit, and there'll be a written response, and then, if necessary, the matter will be referred to us for further review. Is there any new business?
Next meeting.
We need to set the next meeting. I was going to suggest, last year, we combined our November and December meetings because of this holidays. And I was going to suggest we do that again, and that we look for either December 3rd or December 10 as possible dates.
10.
What?
December 10.
10?
Okay.
10?
10 sounds
All right,
good.
we'll set it for December 10. I know Stephanie needs to leave, but we need to have a quorum to vote for an adjournment. Would you like to move to adjourn?
I do, I move to.
All right. I second it. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you. We're adjourned.